So today we have a very eminent panel again, like every time. We have Professor Thomas Blom Hansen, who is the speaker, and a very interesting lecture with a very interesting title, which has also generated a lot of interest. So we are here to listen to the lecture, and it's titled Violence and Democracy on Impunity and Protection in Indian Public Life. So it's my pleasure to welcome all the dignitaries on stage, starting with Professor Thomas Blom Hansen. I welcome him on the dais. We are awaiting our chair, but he is on his way and he'll be here shortly, Dr. Mungekar, and we'll wait for him to join us. In the meanwhile, can we have Father Frazer Mascarenhas, please, on the stage? Yes, the cheer and the applaud, yes. And can we have Irfan Engineer on the dais, please? Before we begin, I would like to say a few words about this memorial lecture. I think we are here also, a lot of us have very fond memories and out of a lot of respect that we had for we have for Dr. Asghar Engineer and the vast body of work and legacy that he has left behind. And these are lectures that are constituted in his memory. And we have been very fortunate to have very eminent scholars who have come every year, twice a year, and graced us with their insights and very stimulating lectures, which are also live streamed. So a little about Dr. Engineer, who was the founder of the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, and along with that, many other institutions and platforms, rigorously working for the objectives that he held dear to his heart, that is reforms in religion. And we know his struggle against the authority in the Dawoodi Bohra sect, and his struggle, and that we all are inspired with. Then the rights of women in Quran, and I think he has, it's no exaggeration to say he has really inspired women all over the world, and wherever we go, and there are women who randomly come up and talk about him and how he has touched their lives. So yes, that's one cause that was very dear to his heart. Liberation theology and the many books that he has written, and he's very well respected for that. And the secular movement in India and communal harmony, that has been very close to his heart. And today we have Professor Thomas Blom Hansen, but also the fact that so much of work has been put into documentation of violence, and that's something Dr. Engineer did so prolifically well, that he has documented most of the major riots in India and written a lot about it when that was not happening at such a large scale. So his contribution to these areas are much appreciated, and this legacy is something that we strive to carry forward, and for which he has won many awards nationally and internationally, including the Right to Livelihood Awards. So today we are here in the memory of Dr. Asghar Engineer. And there are different things that the center does to take his legacy forward, to remember him. And some of the ways to do it, of course, is this memorial lecture. This is the 25th memorial lecture. But also, apart from this, the center, along with other organizations, has instituted the Dr. Asghar Engineer Lifetime Achievement Award. In the past, Flavia Agnes has won it. Professor Darvi has got this award. Posthumously, Justice Suresh has received this award. And of course, we have the Best Published Paper Award, which encourages young scholars in the themes that were dear to Dr. Engineer. We encourage scholarship in those areas and give away the Best Published Paper Award to scholarly articles and pieces. So this is about the center. This is about Dr. Asghar Engineer. I know we don't, we are here to listen to Father Frazer Mascarenhas, the award that is going to be given to him. We are conferring the Dr. Asghar Engineer Award, Lifetime Achievement Award, on Father Stan Swamy posthumously, and I don't think anyone could think of anyone better to get this accolade, and we are here for that. But before that, I would like to call Irfan Engineer to come and speak a lot. We are going to screen a small film on Father Stan Swamy before we give away the award. So I invite Irfan Engineer, the director of CSSS, to come and speak a few words about this film.
Friends, it's such a pleasure to have 25th lecture, Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lecture. 25th is a great number, but we have been able to continue. We always organize one in Mumbai and one in Delhi. This year's second lecture will be organized in Delhi. It is such a pleasure again to talk about Father Stan Swamy, such a committed activist, wonderful human being. Father Frazer will talk about him more, and I don't want to talk about him more. I'll read his citation when we are giving the award. But right now I have to talk about this film. This film has been made by Karwan-e-Mohabbat. It's a short film. It's been made just for us to screen it here, a short film to screen it here. But Karwan-e-Mohabbat is making a longer film on life of Father Stan Swamy and his contribution. We thought it would be apt to screen this film here as we are giving this award here. This is the first screening here of the film, first ever screening of short or long film. So we are lucky to have this film. In fact, the film was speeded up so that we could screen it along with this award. And the film talks about life and contribution of Father Stan Swamy and brings out some aspect of his, what a wonderful and a humble human being that he was, what a committed activist he was, what a committed, I would say, what a committed Christian he was. And that's religiosity that we all should be having. I'll not stand between you and the film much more, and we can start the screening of the film.
झारखंड में जो दो महापुरुष हुए, उन्होंने आदिवासी और जल जंगल जमीन की ही बातों को लेकर संघर्ष किया। पहले दौर के जो बिरसा मुंडा आंदोलन के रहे, वो इनको फासिस्टवादी ताकतों ने मारा। झारखंड में जो दो महापुरुष हुए, उन्होंने आदिवासी और जल जंगल जमीन की ही बातों को लेकर संघर्ष किया। पहले दौर के जो बिरसा मुंडा आंदोलन के रहे, उनको अंग्रेजों ने मारा और इनको फासिस्टवादी ताकतों ने मारा।
84 years old, suffering from Parkinson's disease, Father Stan Swamy dies in custody in a private hospital in Mumbai. He dies on the day of his bail hearings. Father Swamy worked with tribals in Jharkhand, charged under the Anti-Terror Act.
He was facing charges of being a terrorist. Despite his worsening health, multiple appeals for bail had been turned down. In his words, Swamy had told the Bombay High Court, "I would rather die in jail if things go on as it is." He had Parkinson's disease and his lawyers had to reach the courts to even give him access to a sipper. In a cruel irony, his death was announced in court during yet another bail hearing.
स्टैन को टारगेट करने के पीछे सिर्फ झारखंड नहीं था, पूरे भारत में जहाँ जहाँ माइंस, मिनरल्स और जल जंगल ज़मीन का जो मूवमेंट पूरा भारत की आदिवासी बेल्ट में एक मैसेज देना था कि अगर आप जन आंदोलन करोगे तो उनके नेताओं को इसी तरह से हम किडनैप कर लेंगे, जेल में भेज देंगे और हत्या करेंगे। ये मैसेज उनको देना था। स्टैन एक बड़ा चेहरा बन चुके थे आदिवासियों के बीच में और पूरी दुनिया में, सिर्फ भारत में, पूरी दुनिया में ये सवाल रेज कर गई थी कि भाई आदिवासियों का ज़मीन लूटने से जलवायु परिवर्तन हो रहा है, आदिवासी की ज़मीन लूटने से यहाँ पर कृषि पर असर पड़ रहा है, माइनिंग अधिक होने से बेरोजगारी पैदा हो रही है, माइनिंग अधिक होने से यहाँ का वातावरण प्रदूषित हो रहा है, माइनिंग अधिक होने से यहाँ पर पलायन अधिक हो रहा है। ये एक सवाल जो है वो पूरी दुनिया को रेज कर दिए थे उन्होंने, अपनी भाषा, अपनी संस्कृति, अपनी बातों से, डेमोक्रेटिक तरीके से उन्होंने पूरी दुनिया को बताया।
जो आज हुआ, मेरी तलाशी पुणे पुलिस के द्वारा, वो हम सबों को बहुत चिंता देने का विषय है। दूसरी बार मेरी तलाशी की गई और क्या इससे वो पता चलाना चाहते हैं वो भी हम लोगों को स्पष्ट नहीं है, लेकिन मेरी तरफ से किसी प्रकार की सही कानूनी जांच के लिए मैं हमेशा तैयार हूँ।
हम लोग ने एक समय पे सो कॉल पढ़ाई जो है नहीं करना है ऐसा, मगर कुछ जानकारी तो होना है, तो पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशन हम नहीं कर रहे थे। तो हम स्टैन को बोले कि आप ISI बेंगलोर में है, हम आपके यहाँ पर आना चाहते, एकदम चले आओ। फादर स्टैन के वहाँ जब हम बोले कि पढ़ेंगे, और उसके पास हम गए, जब वहाँ हम थे, हमें जो सबसे ज़्यादा समझ में आ रहा था वो था कि लोगों के साथ एक दूसरे का रिलेशन क्या होना। तुम है, तुम्हारे से अगर सामने स्टूडेंट है तो स्टूडेंट टीचर का रिलेशन क्या होगा। तुम है, तुम्हारे सामने सबऑर्डिनेट स्टाफ से, तुम्हारे वहाँ पर काम करने वाले, किचन में काम करने वाले, सफाई के काम करने वाले, उसके साथ आपका रिलेशन क्या होगा। तो ये जो है, हाँ, आपसे नीचे जो लोग के साथ रिलेशन, दिल से दिल, आई लेवल रिलेशन कैसा करेंगे, ये हम स्टैन से सीखे। स्टैन जो है वो उसके पास, खुद के पास भी तो कोई पैसा नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है, वो हमारा टीचर है, क्या है, जो भी है, उसके बाद खुद के पास तो ये नहीं, तो वो हम लोग को क्या दे सकते थे। हमको कपड़ा, ये वो, खाना फाना तो नहीं दे सकते हैं जो एक पिताजी देता है। वो खाली हम लोग को उनका प्यार और उनका त्याग से हमको सीखने का, देखने का। तो हमने अपना ज़िंदगी में, हम लोग का समझ लो, अपना ज़िंदगी में भी हम लोग ने जिस तरीके से जिया है, वो जीने का ये उन्हीं का उससे सीखे। मेरे पास, मेरे एक फिल्म में वो इंटरव्यू दिए हैं, वो बोल रहे कि देखो, मैं जब आया, गांव के लोग बाजार के दिन बाजार आते हैं, तो बाजार जो आदिवासी लोग बाजार आते हैं, वो अपना बाजार में आने के समय कुछ सामान ले आते हैं, उसको बेच देते हैं, उससे जो पैसा आता है उससे दूसरा सामान खरीद के चले जाते हैं। अब गांव से एक आदिवासी औरत आ रही है, वो अपना मुर्गी लेके आ रही है, मुर्गी यहाँ बेचेगी और ले जाएगी। उसका मुर्गी जो है, आधा रास्ते में वो टाउट, हाँ, उसका मुर्गी छीन लेगा, छीन के उसको एक फटा 5 रुपया का नोट उसके सामने फेंक देगा। बोले ये क्या का डीलिंग है, तुमको मुर्गी खरीदना है, रिस्पेक्ट के साथ खरीद लो, ये क्या तुम खींच लिया हाथ से और 5 रुपया देना। ये जो डिग्निटी लेस लाइफ, ये उनको गुस्सा देता था। ये गुस्सा देने के समय वो क्या करते थे कि गांव के लोग को बोलते तुम्हारे साथ कुछ हुआ, चुप बैठने से नहीं चलेगा, चलो खड़ा हो जाओ। तो ये शुरुआत के दिनों में वो लोगों को खाली खड़ा होना, अपना विषय पे खड़ा होना, अपना विषय ऑर्गेनाइज करके प्रॉपर जगह में जाके आवाज़ उठाना, ये उनका एक ये था। कैसा लड़ाई लड़ते थे वो, यही है कि खुद जाके कोई नेतागिरी करके भाषण दे के करना, ऐसा नहीं. At that time, her chicken would be worth 20-25 rupees. She was given 5 rupees, a dirty note thrown at her. Then I said, by God, what is happening? Here are a people who cherish their values and sharing things with nature. And here is another value system which just exploits them and deprives them of our human dignity, human respect. So once I saw this, then I used to ask my boys who were with me, I said, you see what is happening? They say, हाँ father, देखते हैं. But don't we do something about it? क्या कर सकते हैं? It is at that juncture I said, I want to make something of my life for these people. What exactly that something would be, I did not know. I was very young. Afterwards, I had to go through many other years of Jesuit formation and so on. But finally, I stuck on to that dream. And that dream is still there with me. With all that has happened, with all that has gone through.
साथ में गाना, लिखना, पढ़ना, आगे की रणनीति बनाना और आगे साथ साथ चलना. उस जमात कह सकते हैं, उस जमात में उन लोगों ने, आदिवासी समाज ने उनको अडॉप्ट कर लिया, समाहित हो गए उसमें, और वो एक आदिवासी फिलोसफर की तरह चीज़ों को एक्सप्रेट करने लगे, लोगों के बीच में लाने लगे. धीरे धीरे करके लोग समझने लगे, जन आंदोलन समझने लगा, जल जंगल ज़मीन के सवालों के बीच में ये बातें आने लगी कि संस्कृति, सभ्यता और आदिवासियत ये एक अलग प्रक्रिया है, और जिसके अंदर जो ज़मीन का सवाल है, पानी का सवाल है, जंगल का सवाल है, ये सवाल जो है ये उनका हक का सवाल है, क्योंकि वो उनके बीच में हम रहते हैं और उन्हीं के साथ जीते हैं.
Right now, NIA is interrogating me. They have done 15 hours of interrogation, and still they want me to go to Bombay. What is happening to me is not something unique happening to me alone. It's a broader process that is taking place all over the country. We are all aware how prominent intellectuals, lawyers, writers, poets, activists, student leaders, they are all put into jail just because they have expressed their dissent or raised questions about the ruling powers of India. So we are part of the process. As such, in a way, I am happy to be part of this process, because I'm not a silent spectator, but I'm part of it, part of the game, and ready to pay the price, whatever be it.
जब एकदम शरीर गिरते जा रहा है ऐसा, तो उसके साथी लोग जो जेल में हैं, उन लोग अपना पैसे से चंदा करके इनके लिए काजू बादाम लेके आके खीर खाने को दिए. तो ये बोले, भाई ये बार तुम लाए, मैं खा लेता हूँ, मगर कल से ना चिनिया बादाम ले आना, हम लोग सब मिलके खा लेंगे उसको. तो ये जो कॉमरेडली, ये जो सबके साथ सामूहिकता, ये स्टैन ने फिर यहाँ रहते ये सामूहिकता आदिवासी समाज में रह के सीखे हैं, जो हम लोग को सिखाते थे कि सामूहिकता जो कलेक्टिव टेस्ट, he has learned from this society and he was giving us that.
देखिए 2014 के बाद सरकार बदल चुकी थी. यहाँ जो भाजपा की गवर्नमेंट आई थी, वो सीधे धर्म के सवालों के साथ वो अपने आप को स्थापित करना चाहती थी. अब स्थापित करने के लिए उनको कोई ऐसा स्पेस झारखंड में नहीं मिल रहा था, चूँकि झारखंड में 15-16 साल भाजपा का शासन रहा, लेकिन वो अपना स्पेस नहीं बना पा रही थी। तो वो एक हिंसक प्रवृत्ति को डेवलप करने की प्रक्रिया में चल चुकी थी, और इसमें उन्होंने खूंटी के पत्थलगड़ी मूवमेंट जो खड़ा हुआ था, उस पत्थलगड़ी मूवमेंट में उन्होंने फैब्रिकेटेड केसेस डाला, जिसमें स्टैन, मैं और हमारे और भी कई राइटर, सोशल एक्टिविस्ट, 20 लोगों को उन्होंने टारगेट किया। हम 4 लोगों के ऊपर लगातार उन लोगों ने मॉनिटर करते रहे, और कोर्ट में केस जाने के बावजूद वो छापामारी, पुलिस भेजना, ये सारे कुछ करते रहे।
यहाँ पर निर्दोष आदिवासियों को असामाजिक तत्व के नाम पर या तो नक्सलाइट के नाम पर वो गलत तरीके से उनको फंसा के जेल में डाल दिया जाना, और लंबे समय तक उनके ऊपर में कोई विचार नहीं करना। जो विचाराधीन कैदी जिनको मानते हैं, उनको रिहाई की मांग के लिए, उसके लिए भी उन्होंने स्टडी किया, और उसके लिए भी मतलब एकमात्र व्यक्ति थे जो विचाराधीन कैदियों के लिए पर उन्हें न्याय दिलाने के लिए संघर्ष किया।
विचाराधीन कैदियों पर कभी चर्चा नहीं होती थी। स्टैन ने वो PIL फाइल करके ये जता दिया कि सरकारें जो भी आती है, जो सिस्टम है, वो आम जनता को कितना हैरास करती है, ये स्टैंड बताए हैं। और फर्जी इनकाउंटर, फर्जी पॉलिसी, लोगों को अनलॉफुल एक्टिविटीज जैसे मसलों में फंसाया जाना और फंसा कर उनको तंग करना, ये सारी जो चीज़ें हुई है, ये दर्शाता है उनका PIL, जो बहुत बड़ा काम उन्होंने किया। और जो युवाओं को जेल में बंद किया गया था, वो ग्रीन हैंड प्रोजेक्ट के अंतर्गत उनको जो रिलीज कराया है, इससे स्टैंड का जो विस्तार हुआ है ग्रामीण स्तर पर, यूथ के लेवल पर उनका जो इम्पोर्टेंस बढ़ा है, वो बहुत बड़ा है। और स्टैंड को इस काम, इनके जो काम है, मानव अधिकार के जो काम हैं, उनसे उनको समाज कभी भूल नहीं सकता है।
गोरख पांडे का कविता है, किस चीज़ से डरते हैं वे, किस चीज़ से डरते हैं वे, तमाम धन दौलत के बावजूद वो डरते हैं कि निहत्थे और गरीब लोग उनसे डरना बंद कर देंगे। ठीक है, तो ये जो लोगों को जागरण की प्रयास स्टैंड लिया, हाँ, वो लोगों को डरना बंद करने का प्रयास था। तो इससे तो स्टेट, वैसे लोग को तो देशद्रोह नहीं बोलेंगे तो देश प्रेमी बोलेंगे, वो देशद्रोही है। हाँ, मेरा भूख हुआ क्यों, मैं हाँ बोले ना स्टैंड का इस समय पे कि वो उसको अगर किसी को दान किसी को भीख देना है तो भीख देंगे, और उसको उठ खड़ा होकर मेरा खाना क्यों नहीं मिल रहा है पूछने को सिखाएंगे, तब वो तो जिसने सिखाया हो देशद्रोही हो। आप लोग अगर जीसस क्राइस्ट को देखते हैं, उनका डेथ को अगर देखते हैं, तो उनको बहुत सारे स्टेशन ऑफ द क्रॉस बोलते हैं, बहुत सारे राह में बहुत सारी जगह गुजरना पड़ा, और हर एक जगह में उनके ऊपर यातना दिया गया। अगर आप स्टैंड को देखते हैं, उनको जो जेल में जो एक के बाद एक इतना जो यातनाएं हुआ उनके साथ, वो जीसस के जीवन के यातनाएं, या कोई भी क्रांतिकारी जो कष्ट पाते हैं लास्ट में, कभी भी वो कष्ट जैसा होता है वैसा इनके अंदर में भी वो कष्ट के साथ हम जीसस का स्टेशन ऑफ द क्रॉस देखेंगे, तो हमको देखेंगे कि he really lived the life of a Christ।
मैं अटल हूँ और अटल रहूँगा, और जो भी इसके तहत सामना करना हो मैं करने के लिए तैयार रहूँगा। और जो भी मुझे जानते हैं, मेरे साथी हैं, दोस्त हैं, और जो चिंतक हैं, उनसे भी मैं अनुरोध करूँगा कि जो मुझे हो रहा है वो सबों को हो सकता है। जो जनता के हक के लिए खड़े होते हैं, उसके लिए हम लोग को तैयार रखना है।
What a film that was. It brings out two things. Father stands Swamy as a human being, as a simple, humble human being, and his commitment to the cause of justice, firm commitment to the cause of justice. It brought out a feeling in me that sometimes by giving award, you honor a person. That's not the situation here. I think we feel honored, Center feels honored that Father Stan Swamy, on his behalf, Bagaita Institute has agreed to accept this award for and on behalf of Father Stan Swamy posthumously. What a wonderful. I'm just reminded by one more thing. The film brings out commitment of Father Stan Swamy, and not just Father Stan Swamy, the entire Bagaita Institute that he established. Brings out commitment and how he adopted Adivasi life and culture. And somebody makes a statement in name behind the back of President of India, who is no more, that President of India, ex-President of India said that Christians, by conversion, they become anti-national. When ex-president cannot get up from his grave and say this is true or this is not true. During his lifetime, this statement was not made. But this film brings out the contrast. Is it true? So thank you all for coming here, and I invite Neha again to carry this forward.
Thank you so much for your words about the film. And once again, we would like to welcome the dignitaries back on stage. We are joined by our chair for the lecture, Dr. Bhalchandra Mungekar, and Mr. Zahir Kazi. We warmly welcome all of them back on the dais. Okay, I would again welcome Irfan Engineer back here, invite him back here to read out the plaque which will be presented to Father Frazer Mascarenhas.
Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lifetime Achievement Award 2023. Posthumously presented to Fathers Stanislaus Ludu Swamy. Father Stan Swamy, 1937 to 2021, was a beacon of resilience, courage, and compassion. Born on April 26, 1937 in Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu, Father Swamy dedicated his life to advocating human rights for all, with a special focus on Adivasi and indigenous communities. Father Swamy's early exposure to the work of Jesuits in Trichy inspired him to take up religious studies in 1957. His studies in theology and sociology deepened his understanding of the struggles of marginalized people, particularly indigenous communities facing exploitation and displacement. In 1971, he took on the role of Director of Catholic Relief Services Charity in Jamshedpur, organizing relief efforts for the vulnerable. He went on to spend 15 years at Indian Social Institute in Bangalore, 10 of which as director, where he involved himself in training and mentoring young activists from marginalized communities. He worked tirelessly to inspire an entire generation to fight for human rights. Upon returning to Jharkhand in 1991 from Bangalore, he focused on reviving Johar, the Jharkhandi Organization for Human Rights. Father Swamy became a relentless advocate for the rights of Adivasis and other displaced persons, especially in the face of devastating projects like the Netrahat field firing range and the Koel Karo Dam in Jharkhand. In 2006, he founded Bagaicha, an organization dedicated to defending the land and natural resource rights of the Adivasi communities. He was also fearless voice for under trial prisoners from indigenous communities. Throughout his life, he remained steadfast in his commitment to justice, equality, and truth. Even in his tragic final years, he was incarcerated under appalling conditions. Father Swamy's resolve did not waver. His death in 2021, while still incarcerated at the age of 84, left a void. But his legacy continues to inspire generations in the fight for truth, justice, and equality. It is with deep respect and admiration that we, the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, 4 organizations together are giving this award. We, the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, the Central Board of the Dawoodi Bohra Community, the Institute of Islamic Studies, and Bohra Youth Sansthan present the Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer Memorial Lifetime Achievement Award 2023 posthumously to Father Stan Swamy on January 18, 2025.
So like I mentioned before, this award is being given posthumously, and we are very happy that we have amongst us Father Frazer Mascarenhas, who is no stranger to any of us. He has served as the principal of St. Xavier's College in Mumbai since 2003, and he has a long stint of teaching under his belt, so to say, from 1988. He has served on numerous educational committees and initiatives, including a current term on the steering committee of the Planning Commission of India to recommend financial allocation for higher and technical education during the 12th five-year plan of the Government of India. We know him to be a bold voice of human rights, civil liberties, and what is right and truth. So I don't think we could have found any better person that will receive this award on behalf of Father Stan Swamy. So I request all the dignitaries on the dais. We have Dr. Zahir Kazi, we have Professor Thomas Blom Hansen, and we have Bhalchandra Mungekar to kindly give away this award. I would request Father Frazer Mascarenhas to kindly address us with a few words.
Well, first of all, let me express my gratitude for this award to my colleague, Jesuit colleague, Father Stan Swamy. We do feel honored by, all of us, the Jesuits feel honored by this award by the CSSS, because this is an organization that is committed to values and to human rights. And so for this type of recognition from such an organization, and from all of you who have come, of course, for the learned talk, but also for this award-giving ceremony, we are really grateful that, that this has happened and this acknowledgement has been made. I don't know whether you think of Father Stan Swamy as an activist. You'll think of him as an activist. Well, he's often called an activist. But I would call him more an academician, somebody who's dedicated to the intellectual dimensions of life. In fact, that is one of the characteristics that all Jesuits aspire to bring the intellectual dimension to whatever we do, whether it is the spiritual realm or education or cultural activities or whatever. And that is something that seems to have caught the imagination of Stan. But he was not an academic who was in his books and his thoughts and in his clouds. His intellectual work was very deeply rooted in experience. Some of those experiences were brought out nicely in the film. One experience that was mentioned was the subjugation of the tribals. He couldn't imagine that something like that was happening, that they were so badly being cheated, being oppressed. That was one experience that touched him greatly. But another experience was the beauty of the culture of tribals, of the Adivasis. That was also something he couldn't imagine. And he was so upset that that culture was literally being destroyed. And situations were being sort of created when the Adivasis would not be able to live that culture. And that is so precious to him and should be precious to us. That was what sort of galvanized him into intellectual work. So we know he went for studies abroad, etc. And then he came back into an academic institution. For 10 years, he was a director, 15 years there. I happened to be a short-time student of his. I had just joined the Jesuits. I was in training. One of the parts of our training was to go through something of social analysis. And so I went to Bangalore. And I think it must have been about a 15-day course, which he organized, and he was the main speaker. I had already studied sociology, by the way. I had just completed my BA in sociology, so I knew social analysis. But the way he put it really brought it alive and made it real, so that I wanted to know more about Indian social reality. So that was Stan. He could have continued in academics. He was good at it. He could have continued at the Social Institute and gone to our other social institutes and continued purely in writing, teaching, etc. But he did what he was trying to ask all his students to do, and that is go down to the grassroots. So he lived what he was teaching. He went to the grassroots and began using all that analysis, all his intellectual work, using it for the benefit of people who needed it. And that was his life story. And we know how that ended, unfortunately, in a way, but you could say it is also fortunate because it has galvanized so many people. It has inspired so many people, not only in Jharkhand or in India, but across the world. And I think that is the contribution that he made. When I was chatting with him in hospital, he was there, as you know, for more than a month. And those days I would go almost every day and have about an hour's chat. And one of the things he told me is, you know, why I'm put behind bars? Because I saw that there were thousands, not hundreds, thousands of young Adivasis in Jharkhand who were jailed because they were peacefully protesting the takeover of their land by commercial interests, government, etc. So he said he decided to do a study. So you see the intellectual dimension. So not just pure activism for the sake of activism. He first studied the situation, and he went to the homes of a large number of these people collecting data. And then with that data, he filed a PIL, P-I-L, and in the Jharkhand High Court. And we know that he was successful. He was getting released rather, through the court's intervention on bail, different tribal groups who had been unjustly, without any any proof at all, they were just being put behind bars because they were peacefully protesting. No protest is acceptable. This is the type of grassroots intellectual that Stan was. I think that's something that all of us can also, you know, be inspired by and follow. Of course, finally, the lot of the tribals in the jail became his lot. And he was ready for that. That was a risk that he was ready to take. You heard him say that. I asked him in the hospital, in fact, it was in the ICU. I was a little bit impertinent, but I said, Stan, you know, 2 years before you were actually arrested, they had filed that FIR in Pune. After that, couldn't you have kept quiet and, you know, withdrawn from the field, so to say? Then this would not have happened. And he said, Frazer, how could I betray my friends in Jharkhand? I couldn't do that. And so he continued with his activities, which was what then, that warning had been given already. And finally, since he did not heed the warning, then of course the action followed, and he was ready for that. That was a risk that he took. That's the price that he paid. My friends, I think we are all very troubled by what is happening in India, because what had happened in Stan's time has continued and in fact has got worse. And that is precisely why we need people like Stan to inspire us. We cannot sit quiet, but neither can we just go around, you know, shouting slogans. We have to study the situation and use the intellectual dimension to counter what is happening, which we know is unjust and undemocratic. So it is for this reason, because Stan, I think, is a real inspiration to us, and we need such an inspiration today. And it's for this reason that I think this award, which once again points to the work and the life, the example of Stan, this award is worthwhile. So we're very grateful that you have thought of Stan for the award. I would think that, you know, his colleagues in jail who are now on bail, people like Vernon Gonsalves and Arun Ferreira, they would have been better representatives of Stan to receive this award, because they shared his lot. They also took risks and they paid the price. But on behalf of all the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus in India, and especially the Jesuits at Bagaicha in Ranchi. I'm grateful for this award and I very humbly accept it. Thank you very much and God bless.
Thank you so much, Father, for this these words of inspiration and taking us through your anecdotes also about Father Stan Swamy. I think it has enriched us and really inspired us. We have Dr. Zahir Kazi here with us, and we are very happy that he's here with us. I would invite him to say a few words. Dr. Zahir Kazi is the president of Anjuman Islam, which is the largest minority educational conglomerate in the nation, established in 1874. He's a very distinguished figure renowned for his exceptional contributions to education, literature and medical field. And of course, he has won a lot of awards and accolades nationally and internationally. He has been bestowed with the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Ministry of Ayush, Government of India, for his significant role in the field of Indian system of medical education. Giants International awarded and honored him for his exemplary work in education in 2015. Aligarh Muslim University has honored him with Sir Syed's Excellence National Award in 2020. So it's a great pleasure that he has, and he's also a Padam Shri awardee. So we are very, very honored and privileged to have him in the midst of us, and I would invite him to say a few words.
We also thank Kazi Saab for making this hall available to us gratuitously, and it's because of him that we are able to hold this function here.
It's a surprise for me. I thought I would be amongst the audience. The award given to Father Stan Swamy is indeed an inspiration for others, because a lot of work is yet to be done for the tribals. The other day we had a meeting of Rashtra Seva Dal, where I am also managing trustee. One of the activists who has been working for about 40 years in Orissa, she has been saying that the land of tribals is being grabbed by one of the top industrialists. I don't want to name it, will become a political now. And she was saying during the elections they were forced and so on and so forth. And from the medical perspective, I would say that a lot is required to be done for the tribals. Infant mortality rate is probably the highest, and malnourishment to expecting mothers and otherwise. I had occasion to have a look at the Palghar region where tribals live. Their schools, which are managed by some of the government agencies and others, they are in a pathetic state. It's just the education for the sake of it. So in the field of education, healthcare, there is a lot to be done. And human rights, the less I speak, the better it is. At what stage we are in today, and for that matter, the world over as well. He will be remembered by many of us, and the greatest tribute that we can give to him is if most of us take a vow today that we will actually go to the tribal areas and contribute in whatever way. I'm going to do that because I have taken that assignment to improve the quality of education in another organization. That's at Palghar, not too far off from here. It was very sad that the icon of tribal welfare, Father Stan, had to be admitted at the Fag and Holy Family Hospital in Bandra. His health was so bad. So he has suffered, a person who fought for human rights. His own rights were violated. That's the tragedy, the whole thing. As I said, this program just should not end up by remembering him by a function, but we must remember him by our actions. And I suppose many of you here who have come for a love for him will work in some way or the other. even if in a small measure, it will be great tribute. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, sir, for your words. Now, I think all of us are very eagerly awaiting to hear the 25th Dr. Asghar Engineer Memorial Lecture, and we have, like I'm repeating myself, but a very, very eminent panel. We have Professor Thomas Blom Hansen, who is the speaker, and we have Bhalchandra Mungekar, Dr. Bhalchandra Mungekar, who is the chair, and I don't think none of them are strangers to us. And again, I have been giving a very daunting task to introduce them, and I don't think I can do full justice to it. So I'll be very brief before I invite them to speak. So our speaker today, Professor Thomas Blom Hansen, is the Reliance Dhirubhai Ambani Professor of Anthropology and Chair of the Department of Anthropology at Stanford University. He has written on Hindu nationalism, Hindu-Muslim conflicts and urban politics in India, as well as melancholia, memory and cultural politics in post-apartheid South Africa. He is the author of The Saffron Wave, Democracy and Hindu Nationalism in Modern India, Wages of Violence, Naming and Identity in Post-Colonial Bombay, Cool Passion, The Political Theology of Modern Convictions, and Melancholia of Freedom, Social Life in an Indian Township in South Africa. And he has edited a number of works and collections. Most recently, Majoritarian State, How Hindu Nationalism is Changing India. His most recent book is The Law of Force on the Violent Heart of Indian Politics. And of course, I think over here, almost all of us have read his prolific work on Aurangabad and documenting violence and giving insights, very sharp insights into how communal violence has been taking place in India. So we are very, very thankful to him for being here and agreeing so readily and so graciously to deliver this lecture. We have an equally eminent chair for this lecture, and I must mention that Dr. Bhalchandra Mungekar is not keeping quite well today, and yet this is his commitment that he's here with us to chair this session, traveling all the way for being with us. And he is the former member of Rajya Sabha and former Vice Chancellor of University of Mumbai. He is an eminent economist, teacher, educationist and social worker. He has served in various nodal agencies, committees and commissions of the Government of India, such as the Planning Commission, Commission for Agriculture, Cost and Prices, Government of India, etc. Dr. Mungekar has been the Vice Chancellor of the University of Mumbai and Chair and President of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla. He has authored many articles and books, and of course he has traveled around the world where work has taken him, and we are very, very glad that he is here to chair this lecture and give us his insights after Professor Hansen has delivered his lecture. So I invite Professor Hansen to please deliver his lecture. Can we keep this down the way it is? Do you need the charger?
No. So here we are. So let me first begin by thanking the Center for the Study of Society and Secularism for this invitation and this great honor to be here today and to deliver the 25th Asghar Ali Engineer Lecture. I want to begin by just narrating a little anecdote from back in the early 90s, 91 actually, when I came here to Bombay to do field work for my PhD dissertation. And of course I was familiar with the work and publications of Dr. Engineer, and I decided to pay this was before cell phones and all that kind of stuff, so I thought I would just show up. I was a little nervous about it. I thought, how would that be? Could I just show up unannounced? And I did, and of course it turned out, as everybody who has have had any chance to meet with Dr. Engineer would know, that my anxiety was completely unwarranted. And I was invited in, and Dr. Engineer was sitting in his study in a room jam-packed full of reports, books, papers everywhere, and we talked excitedly and interestingly. I learned a huge amount for like several hours, and he asked me to come back again, which I did on several occasions. So for me, Dr. Engineer really combined that deep erudition, personal commitment with kindness, and also a dedication to be a public intellectual of a kind that thrived in India for many decades, and indeed Stan Swamy was also one of those. It's a figure that maybe is not, it's a type of intervention that's maybe declining somewhat today, although many people, including many people in this room, and certainly the center, are carrying on this kind of work under the leadership of Irfan Engineer and his colleagues, and it's kind of work that's never been more needed than today. So let me just get in front of my computer. I'm reading from my screen, or looking at my screen, so bear with me on that. Today, I would like to talk to you less about perhaps directly violence in the sort of immediate sense that the title might give away, but actually about impunity and how it stands at the center of public life in India. In fact, the culture, and it's well known to many of you, and I may be saying things in the next 40 minutes or so that many of you will be familiar with. Maybe you'll find some of the framing of interest. So it's clear that a culture of impunity is pervading many branches of the state, and no more so than the law enforcement agencies. But a promise of impunity also pervades political parties, and it motivates many who join political machines or seek elected office, also well known. Impunity and the expectation of being able to bend the rules, violate laws and regulations without any personal consequences, also, as we know, but rarely talked about, widespread in the world of business, in the real estate sector, well known, and elsewhere. For ordinary non-elite Indians, the only antidote to this pervasive culture of impunity has always been politics in its very broadest sense, both as elections, but also as memberships or reliance on individuals and organizations that are believed to have some kind of social standing or political clout or ability to represent them. This means that most ordinary Indians today understand political power primarily as a process of extending or calling upon or withdrawing protection of livelihoods, of property, security, physical or otherwise, from arbitrary protection from arbitrary decisions, or often from non-decisions, as we know, by bureaucrats, or from predatory behavior by powerful interest and dominant communities. So let me begin to talk with a little bit about the state and the bureaucracy. Now, we know that all bureaucracies and law enforcement agencies always exercise a measure of discretionary power. That is, the right and necessity always to interpret law and regulations in every specific case and encounter. But the use of discretion in the Indian context is unusually broad and unusually pervasive by comparison with many other countries in the world. And there are several reasons for this. The first reason is that the colonial state was built, as we know, as an instrument of control and coercion, a strong executive with many emergency and police powers built often on a racist suspicion of Indians and a trust in the inherent reasonableness of white officers, as we know, largely unwarranted. Those were the people who dominated the upper echelons of the state. There were many stop and control mechanisms that were built into the systems. Much of this persists, including, of course, famously the NOCs and no objection certificates, in order to control Indian administrative labor and procedure from the corrupt practices that were believed by the colonial state to pervade Indian society. The second reason is that the following of the convention of following precedent, that is, the path taken by previous decisions in a certain domain will shape future decisions, that is, like case law in the legal domain, has generally been exceptionally weak in India, partly, and in colonial India too, partly because of very poor record keeping, but also because of the enormous diversity of Indian society. That meant that no form of one-size-fits-all method could really be implemented. So in other words, from the get-go, certainly from the formation of the colonial state, wide discretionary power and always the possibility of negotiating and influencing decisions became baked in to the very heart of the state, as it were. We also know that after independence, the state bureaucracy became critical to implement the whole slew of new reform measures and new legislations, much of it progressive, from new land and property regimes to public education, health, and so on and so forth. You're all familiar with this. In this regime, the Nehruvian golden years that many tend to think of it like, bureaucrats were assumed to be the educated people capable of exercising good and rational judgment, and indeed also continue to exercise discretion. The bureaucracy and its officers were in fact often celebrated for their competence and foresight, and were seen as indispensable to any reform effort, and the politicians often seen as impeding that effort. But over time, with the evolution and flourishing of popular democracy, and it is in some ways a success story, but it's also a very partial success story in India, both elected officials and dominant vested interests found the ability of local officers to exercise considerable administrative discretion to be immensely useful to further their own interest, to prevent, delay implementation of various schemes, policies, to pay off, co-opt government officials, and so on and so forth. We all know that story. But what we should think about is how this historically, and it was not inevitable, gradually enabled a deeply systemic culture of what I call a culture of impunity to emerge, reinforced, in fact, by the strength of upper caste and elite ties and networks that pervaded the bureaucracy as well as business, so that many members, most members of the upper echelons of Indian society could largely evade the force of law by soliciting phone calls by well-connected and powerful relatives inside or outside the bureaucracy. This has led to the widespread but factually well-founded idea among many non-elite Indians that those with money, property, and connection, or sifarish, usually are above the law and rarely face any serious personal consequence of their actions. This is a deep problem. One of the most damaging effects of this systemic impunity and accountability is a widespread non-implementation, in fact, of rules and regulations. So it's not that often that there is too much government, but there's actually not enough of it, and it's not implemented. You all are familiar with this. Leaving vast areas of economy, property, and livelihoods in a state of perpetual provisional illegality. Example, as you may know, a very large number of buildings in India, well above 50%, maybe as many as 80%, but we don't have good numbers on this, are built without proper permit, either because they're older or they're in violation of one or another building code. In some cases, builders have bribed officials to cut corners. In other cases, buildings are old, predating planning frameworks and regulations and so on. City and district officials are, in fact, empowered to determine whether a building is authorized or unauthorized, and it's at their discretion. Or they can determine a path to make them legal, semi-legal, or subject to seizure, acquisition, and demolition. I have more to say about this as we go forward. This means that tenure and even fully titled ownership of a property is uncertain and can be subject to discretionary power. Most of the time, as you well know, nothing happens, but if a family or individual finds themselves in a dispute with powerful interests, or if they belong, as we know, to a minority, their houses and livelihoods can literally be erased overnight as a form of punishment. And this is without passing any new laws, anything like that, and even can be done without, as it were, outside the law, within the law, but outside the law at the same time. In Uttar Pradesh and other states, such selective, as we know, selective implementation of building regulations has actually been the main weapon in targeting Muslims, and has been celebrated, as you know, by BJP supporters as a bulldozer Raj. but it's the combination of widespread illegality and the excessive and unaccountable and selective use of discretionary power that means that otherwise reasonable land and building regulations can become unaccountable weapons in the hands of officials and elected politicians, but without actually breaking the law. Now, you may be aware of, and certainly in Bombay, there's been a big debate over decades that worldwide there's been a tendency, there's been a sort of a big wave of trying to solve the problem of slums and illegal settlements in major cities across the world by granting titles to those who live in these unauthorized settlements, informal settlements. The idea is that with proper home ownership, a real housing market will emerge, and this will motivate people to improve their houses, convert them from kacha to pakka, as it were, and thereby also accumulating some wealth. But interestingly, in India, and here we come back to the question of discretion, these policies have often been translated into forms of regularization, where people receive a certificate of possession that's attached to their name and their family, but that certificate can generally not be sold or transferred. Surprise, only on one condition, if approved by a magistrate or a collector's office, at their discretion. We come back to this again and again. The underlying property structure is therefore still intact. This is typically public land or can be private land, and the certificate usually preempts the possibility of residents making what some of you may know is called adverse possession claims on the land, which enables people who have to actually acquire and gain ownership of properties. Now, these regularization processes that have good intentions in many ways, they have indeed enabled people to improve their houses and pass them on to their children, but without title, there is little opportunity to do what middle-class people who live in properly titled houses do, which is to accumulate wealth and a modest surplus that can be passed on. That is simply not possible. And the Indian bureaucracy and the political system has a clear preference for issuing such certificates over proper transferable titles because it keeps everything fluid, a little bit fluid, and it retains the right of the authorities to change the classification of properties, to rezone, acquire land without lengthy legal suits. Let me go to another domain, the law enforcement. Now, of course, we know that the culture of the more perhaps damaging effects of discretionary power and impunity is most pronounced when it comes to security laws and law enforcement agencies. I don't need to educate most of the people in this audience about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, for instance, that perpetually over many decades have shielded members of the armed forces from liability or legal responsibility for any action taken in the line of duty in so-called disturbed districts, that is, disturbed areas, 31 districts counting, in the northeast, and also Jammu and Kashmir, as well as areas with active Maoist militias. This has been a law that's been heavily criticized, but actually less debated than you would think. The more debated law is, of course, the law that's been applied to the Bhima Koregaon cases and to the urban Naxals, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act of 1967, passed by a Congress government and then weaponized a little more by the current government, but actually, and extended to some extent, but the fundamental framework is from the 60s. You may not know that the term disturbed area is also applied by some police forces to mainly urban Muslim areas, such as in parts of Gujarat, extending near totally discretionary power almost infinitely over those areas that see heavy policing and actually function more or less like an enclosed camp or a ghetto. Residents in these declared disturbed urban areas cannot move in or out of such areas without permission by the police authorities, and every property transaction and even a sale of any kind require the approval by the district collector, and here again, discretion and permission appears again as the weapon of choice. In a recent book on the lengthy trials of terror suspects in Delhi, anthropologist Mayur Suresh details the multiple forms of discretionary and unaccountable procedures and pre-trial detention permitted by these national security laws, which have kept many suspects in detention for almost a decade. Most of them have in fact been released because their cases collapsed because of solid evidence once it got to court or before a judge in a hearing. So those men were not really guilty in the eyes of the law, but it turned out nonetheless that they were being punished for more than 10 years, incarcerated for more than 10 years by the routine application of unaccountable discretionary power without breaking any law. I need not go into CBI, Enforcement Directorate, income tax, you know it all. Now, the most pervasive problem, as I said, I think lies with the police force. We know about the low performance of a police force across the country and their notorious record of violence, high rates of custodial deaths and custodial violence, lack of accountability, and so on and so forth. You may also know that since 1980, there's been 5 major central government commissions that all in various ways have recommended deep reforms of the police force that still largely follows colonial era procedures, personnel rules, recruitment strategies, and so on. Despite the many recommendations for deep structural change, no major reform has actually followed. And we also know that the police has a poor public image, not just in the usual way that there is corruption, but actually it's biased against, or it's tilted in how policing is applied to the middle class and property classes and those without. A recent study by the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in Delhi some years ago interviewed about 16,000 individuals across the country. The study found, and it was a study about encounters with the police, what happened, and so on and so forth. The study demonstrated that while elite and middle-class Indians generally do not hesitate to seek and, in fact, demand action from the police in contexts mostly initiated by citizens themselves, most non-elite Indians, particularly those from the lower social strata, actively seek to avoid contact with the police at almost any cost. The vast majority of reported, almost all reported contacts between that category of people and the police force are involuntary. Now, this complete absence of public trust stands to reason severely impairs any proper investigation when there is no trust. You cannot, who is going to tell the policeman the truth? And it also results in a very substantial, as we know, underreporting of crimes, violent incidents, including gender violence. It's widely assumed among social activists, for instance, that the reported incidents of domestic violence and other forms of gender violence account for less than 10% of all incidents in the country, although slowly rising as some awareness of the new legal frameworks that came in a couple of decades ago are percolating. Now, one does not have to spend a whole lot of time in slums or among social and religious minorities in India to realize the deep gulf of suspicion regarding the police commonly seen by many of these communities as constant menace, a form of gang above the gangs, as it were, and yet, curiously, and I would be interested in hearing comments on this from all of you, no major political formation in India, political party or movement, has ever is faced by a number to make its way to the records, because most station commanders and so on, police commissioners, will go out of their way to have as low a number as possible on record, because it affects their career prospects. But nonetheless, each year, for many years, around 75,000 incidents are recorded under these offenses, IPC offenses. And of those, only a few thousand incidents are actually classified as communal, while the vast majorities of those incidents, above 60,000, are categorized as other, connected to community rivalry, protest against public officials, destruction of public property, and so on. Roughly since 2016, you will be interested in this, and especially after 2019, these published figures have seen a historic and curious plunge, by as much as 10 to 15% per year, according to the Ministry of Home Affairs. I'll leave it to this audience to speculate whether this really reflects what government officials like to call an increase in state capacity, or whether there might be some fiddling or doctoring of data involved, as we have seen in other domains in recent years. In any case, the toll of death and injury is often understood and often reported by the press in these incidents as manifestations of enmity between social and religious groups. However, if you look carefully at those numbers, a very substantial percentage of those killed and injured during those such events are actually victims of police firing that use live ammunition. It's one of the only countries in the world where the police routinely use live ammunition as a means of crowd control. So when you see the death toll, it actually indicates enmity, yes, but it also indicates enormous police brutality. And it's only in the last decade or so that the Indian police has started to invest in other and less lethal forms of crowd control. Now, only in the very rarest cases are police officers held accountable for such excessive use of force. We shouldn't forget that also, and you know this, the police has been actively involved in propagating the idea of lethal force and dead criminals, mostly mere suspects, as a proof itself of crime fighting and the effects of crime fighting. And the encounter killings pioneered by the police force in the city, of course, a very classic example that has spread across the country. I want to tell you another story that's perhaps a little less known. In 2017, a little-known law until then, called the Enemy Property Act, was significantly expanded so that all Muslim families whose more distant relatives who had left for Pakistan, maybe in the past, now potentially faced confiscation of their properties at the discretion of the Office of the Custodian, which is under the Ministry of Home. Along with the Evacuee Property Act of 1950, this little-known law had converted land and property of the enemies of the state into national property held by the custodian in perpetuity. But with this amendment under BJP's rule in 2017, any property owned by a relative of anyone who had left for Pakistan could be declared enemy property and therefore property of the nation. As a result, the number of properties held by the custodian has risen dramatically from a little over 2,000 in 2010 to more than 15,000 in 2017, and still rising, although not reported diligently anymore. Further, the law also allows the custodian to sell off property supposedly to non-Muslims deemed to be the proper members of the Indian people. On a Monday evening in February 2023, where I happened to be in the city of Aurangabad on a shorter visit, officials from the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is where the custodian's office is under, moved quickly to annul all existing title deeds, leases, and property record on 3 large plots of land right in the old city of Aurangabad. They restored the title to what they claimed was the original owner of these 22 acres of land, densely built up urban land today, a wealthy landowner and aristocrat who was said to have left for Pakistan at the time, making this entire area today home to about 5,000 families, about 40,000 people, enemy property in one fell swoop. His family has contested the claim. They've argued that the man left for Hyderabad, leaving the land, which at the time was an orchard, leaving it vacant. Over the decades, what some residents describe as the land mafia moved in, aided by local elected corporators and other political figures, and began to sell and lease out centrally located areas as the city grew rapidly in the last few decades, 1980s and 90s especially. Today, these 22 acres have a bewildering array of multi-layered ownership and leasing arrangements, some of them formalized as documents of variable legality, others existing as informal arrangements within extended families, and other more precarious informal lease and rental agreements. All these dwellings regardless of their unclear formal status, have electricity and water connections that are official and they're registered. This complexity makes these areas quite typical of thousands of similar older areas in urban India, but actually the underlying ownership structure is unresolved. In one fell swoop, the authorities had declared all of these arrangements void and invalid, as it is within the discretionary power of the custodian's office to do so. The problem for the residents is that the 2017 amendment of this act, it was added in small print, cannot be challenged in any civil court. Only individual cases may be heard that can, in process that can take many years. Some residents fear now, and I was in the area just yesterday, actually I came this morning in from Aurangabad, fear that the bulldozers will move in and they will face eviction, as has been the case in other parts of the country. To do so would be entirely within the law and wouldn't oblige the government to pay any compensation to the thousands of families that have overnight become defined as illegal squatters on what is now government land. Speculations, as you can imagine, are rife about what will happen next. Is this harassment? Pure and simple, some ask. Some speculate that this is a way to turn the constituents against the then sitting MP, Imtiaz Jalil, elected on an MIM ticket, because he couldn't appeal this decision, but his constituents nonetheless would expect him to do something, and it would in some ways amount to a public humiliation of an otherwise a popular and effective MP. Others see this as the hand of a powerful real estate mafia behind it, would like to purchase the land and build multi-story buildings. But as a man said to me the other day, no Hindus will come and live in this Pakka Muslim area, but nonetheless the specter of the bulldozer looms. So let me now turn, in the last part of this talk, to the other side of the culture of impunity, the role of elected officials and the role of popular and everyday politics. Now we know that, and this is standard, it's been going on for decades, most public debates in India about the rule of law revolve again and again around the role of criminal politicians and how individuals operating in the illegal and criminal economy seek public office to protect themselves, seek impunity, expand their business, so to speak, all the cases of corrupt politicians, how many cases are against them, and so on. This has been going on for decades. Now, this is indeed one side of the problem, but let's not forget that each and every of these well-known corrupt practices of elected officials is only possible because of the existing large web of illegality across so many sectors, and because impunity can be easily bought and transacted with government officials anywhere. Now, electoral democracy and the purchase of electoral tickets, attempt to purchase votes, rig elections, and what, yes, is all part of this larger economy of politics, if you like, but it's not necessarily its chief cause or its main driver. I am pretty convinced that the culture of impunity would remain pervasive even in the absence of electoral democracy. It was not as if it stopped during emergency, let's say, right? Let me outline, therefore, two common ideas of how power and politics in India, both very far removed from any classical idea of democratic politics as this is the textbook idea, right, as an expression of collective interest, of collective values, collective aspiration, but instead directly linked to the culture of impunity that I've described. One is about protection, the other is about redress, or seeking redress for injustice. Last year I sat down with 3 local men, also from Aurangabad, where I have done this work for a number of years. Last time I saw them, they were active members of Shiv Sena, and this was a time where the party had been split in 2, and Shinde had defected with many elected members, ostensibly in a protest against the party's drift towards the political center, away from an earlier hardline identity. One of the men told me, now, we don't like the way that Shinde betrayed Uddhav Sir, but we felt that Uddhav Sir had abandoned us. We were facing so much pressure from the municipal corporation and the police also, so we had no choice but to follow Shinde. What the men referred to was the perception that Uddhav Thackeray was trying to give his party a cleaner image and he no longer allowed the party to protect and bail out every member and local activist. One of the men had become a successful builder during his time as an elected member of the corporation. Others also dabbled in land and construction. It was clear that they felt that the tacit contract between them and their political party was broken, as protection was no longer to be expected. Having lost their upar there above, they were now vulnerable to investigation from authorities, not because the law was being necessarily implemented, but they were being weakened in the eyes of business and political rival. Now, this notion that political power is really essentially about providing protection is so pervasive, but not maybe discussed enough. Slum dwellers seek protection from demolitions, removals, from multiple uncertainties in their lives. They support informal slumlords, strong men of dubious reputation who often cultivate and at times are recruited by political parties. Farmers, and in fact, there's been lots of studies that show that those kind of social workers or sort of local activists or local busybodies who help people fill out applications and apply for online things and so on, they are way more effective if they're affiliated with a political party than if they're not, right? So there is a way in which this kind of protection, local protection, a local promise of protection also deals with electoral politics. We know that farmers who expect their elected representative to put them ahead in a queue for loans, for instance, or middle-class households who seek representatives that can protect their housing colony against illegal encroachment or other perceived threats from the poor or minorities. Now, political connection can provide protection from legal prosecution and investigation, but it can also provide opportunities for revenge and retribution against real or perceived enemies. This is a real motivation for some of those seeking office or those seeking alignment with a ruling dispensation. And such revenge go hand in hand with protection. One can start investigation of an opposition party, a political or business rival, or one can seek retributive action against the whole entire category of people, a community, or those formerly holding power. As those of you who follow American politics, and I guess it's hard not to do in this day and age, will know that Trump and his followers have made this combination of protection and revenge a central part of their political strategy and their rhetoric. Now, this apparent convergence of trends in India and the US certainly demonstrates various degrees of what we could call democratic decline, but I think it first and foremost demonstrates the perils of hyper-politicization that is deep-seated in India and deepening in the US by the day. What does that mean? It means that the view of political life is like this, that all politics is ultimately transactional, that the idea of public interest is a fiction, that everybody is fundamentally partisan and only protecting their own interest and community. There is no ethical standard, there is only power. That's what hyper-politicization does. India has been in this space for a long time. Other countries are catching up, as it were, unfortunately, on this front. Now, the other dimension of this pervasive idea of the need for protection from arbitrary government and predatory elites is that popular politics, to a very large extent, revolves around the need for what I call redress. Anyone who's visited an office of a local elected politician will witness the rituals of Darbar, holding court, a crucial part of what we could call political retailing, where constituents come to complain, petition, offer their services in equal measure. A crucial part of such retailing work also done, by the way, by countless local social activists, NGOs that are also asked by the people they protect or they would seek their protection to do this kind of work, revolves around managing the hope and expectation of redress of the effects of some of the arbitrary decisions and injustices that people experience, and to seek some form of compensation for a loss or an injury. Most of these injuries and injustices are in fact produced by arbitrary administrative decisions and more commonly lack of action or lack of fulfillment of an entitlement or public good. Elected members of a ruling party, as well as many other established figures or social activists, can often provide some redress by calling offices and officers in the bureaucracy, and in turn strengthen their own reputation among their constituents. We know that many political careers are founded on such reputations for providing relief and redress, but such efforts, however all-consuming and praiseworthy they may be, rarely extend to changing or even challenging the culture of illegality and impunity that produce such problems and challenges in the first place. The fact that for most people in India, seeking relief or redress can only happen through a politician or an eminent figure or some other person holding some amount, small or large, of power, perceived or not, perpetuates the idea that rights and entitlements can only become real and realized through some form of forceful intervention, a practice that in turn reproduces the very dependency on such figures that are actually, in a sense, the elementary figures in the functioning of Indian democracy. Now, today we know that the government of India has left behind an earlier set of policies that aimed at giving people rights. There were lots of rights-based schemes that gave people a certain right to something, service, education, employment guarantee, and so on and so forth. Instead, there were schemes of all kinds, housing subsidies, medical subsidies. All of them require poor people to go through complicated processes of application and verification in order to get any benefit, thereby deepening, in fact, in practice, their dependence on brokers, social workers, and those providing those kind of services, often connected with political parties, and if they're not, they will be recruited by political parties if they're good at their job. Now, these schemes ostensibly seek redress and seek to ameliorate suffering on a grand scale, but there's little or no attention paid to the structural forces in the economy or in the society that continues to reproduce the deep inequality, endemic violence, and impunity of every imaginable kind that actually these schemes produce. So there's a kind of redress without solution. Now, these two patterns of actions and expectations are very interconnected, but they're also unequal in scale and impact. On one hand, you have a culture of impunity, pervasive, systemically impactful, especially vis-a-vis the poorest communities in the country. On the other hand, the politics of redress, deeply legitimate, deeply popular, celebrated, but uneven, quite dispersed, and only occasionally impactful, mostly at a symbolic level. So I'll stop here and say with these words that the challenge is this, as far as I can see, that how can one begin, one has to, I think, begin to at least talk about the culture of impunity, to begin to address it. And how can one make that a part of a culture or a legitimate politics of redress that's already there and established? The answer, in my view, is not to restore or establish is not just to restore or establish proper autonomy and accountability of institutions, because some of them were not as autonomous and not as accountable as we would like to think. In retrospect, everything before a certain date looks much better than it maybe was. But instead, to make creative and pervasive institutional reform the heart of any social justice project, a form of social justice that doesn't just deliver redress at the level of political retailing and mass protests, but something larger, more structural, more ambitious. We saw the beginnings of some of that a couple of decades ago. This project of making India properly democratic by actually providing dignity to ordinary people and deliver rights, not just entitlements to certain schemes. And this was, in my view, precisely the vision that motivated so many reformers, including Dr. Engineer, including Stan Swamy. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Hansen. I think You have touched a theme that is truly pervasive and dominant in the political landscape of India today, and touching many, many themes. So it really resonated with us. I now welcome Professor Dr. Bhalchandra Mungekar to give his chair's remarks that we're looking forward to.
Professor Thomas Hansen, Dr. Kazi, Father Mascarenhas, Mr. Irfan Engineer, and my distinguished colleague friends. First of all, I am extremely happy to see some of my former colleagues in the University of Mumbai. This is one of the incidental benefits, windfall gain in economics, that I could meet them once again after a long period of time. I pay my humble tribute to Stan Swamy for his heroic life, for whatever constructive work he has done for the Adivasis. Whenever we talk of Adivasis, number of things come to my mind because I was chairman of the standing committee for the welfare of the tribals appointed by Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh. And I submitted 4 reports, for example, land acquisition, compensation, resettlement, and rehabilitation. Second report was Tribal Forest Land Rights Act. And all the 4 were transformed ultimately into legal legislation. None of the acts has been properly implemented. This is one of the great tragedy of the country, as Professor Anthropologist once said, that this country never suffered from the scarcity of laws, but suffered from the implementation or non-implementation. Anyway, it's indeed great pleasure for me to preside over 25th Dr. Asghar Engineer Memorial Lecture. My relationship with Dr. Engineer, we used to call him Engineer Saab, for nearly 35 years, because our activities, Yuva Krantidal activities and the activities of his own social reform movement, by that time this organization was not into existence. They were running parallel to each other, and he was our mentor in order to understand what kind of reforms are necessary so for the Bohra Muslim community is important, and he was fighting constantly against the hegemony of Mr. Sayyidna. That's why this is time for me to pay a rich tribute to the work that he has done in both terms of both practical understanding the problems of reforms among the Muslim community, Bohra community particularly. And also, once I was at Madhulime, and he was searching for the book Islamic State. You must have read it. It is his pioneering contribution to understand what Islamic State is and what are its parameters and what is its canvas, and compliment coming from Madhulime. It just, I conveyed Engineer Saab that it was something fabulous and he was so happy about it. Now, since Professor Hansen has covered extensively the areas like Jammu and Kashmir Special Power Act, then Enemy Property Act and so many other things, and also touched upon certain aspects of the violence in India and the future of the democracy, I don't want to go into those things once again. Now, number of things and number of ideas are crowding my mind at this point of time when I am standing before you. But 2-3 things I must share with you. I don't understand why social scientists or political scientists particularly fail to define that today if India is less than democracy, then how then less than democracy has to be characterized. As we all know that fascism is the latest development in the history of political theory. And when we are talking about India today is less than political democracy, if we take a period particularly of last 10 years, 2014-2024, this converting liberal secular democracy into less than democracy, how to characterize it, that is extremely important. And here comes to my mind is that whether it could be considered any kind of fascism. Other day when I was going through for my academic work into the definitions of fascism, I counted them, there were nearly 110. It is the most questionable, controversial concept in the history of political theory and the latest development. And no two social scientists or political scientists converge on understanding what precisely fascism is. But if you have got number of characteristics of fascism in one way or the other in the present Indian nature of the Indian state, why not to use that term in any kind of, you can have own, you can, for example, we talk of Hindu nationalism. What is the meaning of Hindu nationalism? This predominant of majority community and superimposition of will of the majority. Now we understand majority and minority, they are flexible political terms. They are essentially political terms. But Indian political majority also is a communal majority. The conflict in India is, it's not only political majority. Political majority means one political party comes to power which is getting majority and forms the government, and next time that they will be sitting in the opposition. Here political majority unfortunately is communal majority, and that is one of the reasons that Maulana Azad wanted till the last moment that India should not be partitioned, because he was scared that once India is partitioned, the communal majority will be so dominant that the politically or the socially or religious minority community, particularly Muslim, will be at the receiving end. You might be aware, after passing the resolution in the Congress Working Committee, when Gandhiji was totally sidelined, even at that point of time, Maulana Azad was wanting that partition should be avoided. Ambedkar, his thoughts on Pakistan, he said that Pakistan is inevitable. And that is my view too. Pakistan was inevitable. But Ambedkar categorically mentioned partition of country will not solve the communal problem, and that precisely happened. Because guilty men of India's partition of Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, that because they wanted hurriedly to capture the political power, is no more true, or at least not substantially true. It might be partial, one dimension of the transfer of political power. The question is, when we talk of Hindu nationalism, essentially the crux of the matter is Hindu-Muslim relationship. There are three basic documents on which Hindu nationalism stands. One, Savarkar's that Brim pamphlet, it is called Grantha. Marathi म्हणजे त्याला ग्रंथ म्हणतात. It is around 86-page pamphlet, Hindutva, written in 1923. And Golwalkar, 2 books, another one pamphlet, We Are Our Nation Would Define, and second bunch of thoughts. They give the ideological apparatus of the Hindu nation. State has 2 apparatuses. One is ideological apparatus, and second is coercive apparatus. Coercive apparatus takes into account what comprises jails, prisons, police force, constabulary, armed forces, including defense forces. But then country where the dissenters cannot be only controlled only through armed forces or only through the police forces. That's why ideological apparatus of the state is extremely important. And that ideological apparatus was provided by the 2 persons I mentioned just now, Savarkar and Golwalkar. Now the question is, Savarkar categorically mentioned that once Muslim demanded partition and they got Pakistan, I quote, what remains of India belongs to Hindus. Golwalkar wanted purification. Golwalkar wanted absolutely spiritual revolution. And the Muslim community is coming in the way of spiritual revolution. That's a substantial characteristics of the state. They are presently available in the country like India, which could be termed at any kind of 103 definitions. You can have 104th definition, but then I don't think we shall avoid the using the term fascism of some kind. The book which I am writing about my autobiography, I have called that Present State of Affairs, I called it, and I should request when we shall be having the question answer, question me and we shall interact with that. I call it Indian version of fascism. Classical fascism of Italy, Nazism of Germany, fascism not O, which is generally described, I prefer to call that is Indian version of fascism today. Because the terms categorically give you complete picture of what kind of nature of the state, present state is. Now in this context, Marxist and communists particularly also must introspect their materialistic interpretation of history. They must understand that history doesn't travel in unilinear way, that primitive capitalism or primitive communism and slavery and feudalism and capitalism and socialism, and there are very strong aberrations. And at what present we are finding is extremely strong aberration in terms of the violence. 10 years before, or even 6-7 years before, we were reading in the newspaper the incidents of violence were reported largely. But during last 10 years, the scale of violence against whom, at Dantwal I used to mention that we aren't talking about poverty, but who are poor? None of us here can be considered as poor and apply for Maji Ladki Bahin 1,500 rupees per month. Immediate question should be, who are poor? That violence against whom? Violence against tribals because they are demanding their resettlement and rehabilitation. Violence against scheduled castes because they are demanding wages and number of things, and Civil Rights Act is not at all implemented. Violence against Christians because they are mainly, what is the opposition to Christians? When Stan Swamy's film I was looking into, all of them, those who were singing song in, they were converted Christians. Now the main accusation against Hindu nationalists, against Christian is that they convert in a large way scheduled tribes or the tribals. And systematically in the northeastern states particularly, 7 states, excluding Assam. Assam is the only state which is having substantial population of Hindus, unlike all other states. When Mother Teresa was given Bharat Ratna, the people abused her because what kind of Bharat Ratna was given to her? Because she only converted them Hindus or tribals. Tribals in fact are not Hindus, but we take them into account when we are considering 85% Hindus as against 15% of the minorities or Muslims particularly. That's the crux of the matter according to me is that today entire Indian politics, the violence of the kind is centered around Hindu-Muslim relationship. And for times to come, that is continued to remain so. Now what happens is, we condemn communalism of both, whether it is majority community or minority community, whether it is Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists or Sikhs or anybody for that matter. But the question is, no sooner than the Hindu communalism converted into Indian version of fascism, violence has become a generalized phenomenon. The kind of violence against women, it is beyond comprehension. Their close relatives, the outsiders, because state is neutral. There are 2 kinds of violences. One kind of violence is sporadic violence. Second kind of violence is communal violence or communal riots. But third violence is state engineered violence. Today we are having violence because state is totally neutral. State doesn't intervene at all. And Manipur is the best possible example. For the smallest possible reason, government imposes presidential rule. Here entire Manipur burned, thousands of people died, women were paraded naked, and still presidential rule is not imposed. This means that certain agenda is there with the government that we shall not intervene in this kind of situation. The other 2 points are how Muslims are reacting to this. That is also extremely important. It is gratifying that Muslims, as they were reacting before 1992 Babri Masjid demolition are not reacting in a strong way. This does not mean that they will not react in the strong way, but taking into characteristics of the state, and the strength of the state, the nature of the state, the mechanism of the operations of the state is so powerful that Muslims are at the receiving end. They are buying peace. In a democratic system, any section of the society has to buy the peace and accepting violence as a given way of life. There cannot be a greater tragedy of a democratic system. That it is in this way. Now the last point is, in such situation, Irfan, thank you very much. The last point is, under these situations, what needs to be done? Under this situation, what needs to be done? I think historically, any kind of oppressive system can be rejected, can be defeated only through the people's movement. But again, when you talk of people's movement with democratic means. Government has introduced a new category of which Stan Swamy was victim, that urban Naxals. Now, of all the categories that the government of the state has, I'm not talking about government in conventional sense. I'm talking state as an institution, the way Marx and Lenin use. Of all the categories that the state has introduced and discovered after independence of 1947, the most dangerous category is urban Naxals. Because any dissenter with the state or the government on any policy or program living in urban area is urban Naxalite. That's why anybody, the major point, the major departure of democracy into less than democracy is the generalized sense of condemning dissenters into one common category. That's why anybody tomorrow, and unfortunately it was during the Congress government, that prevention of the unlawful activities, UAPA, what is it? UAPA, no? Unlawful Act Prevention Activities. It was brought when Chidambaram was Home Minister. I was struggling not to pass this kind of act. And unfortunately, you know, the tragedy or poetic justice or injustice, Mr. Chidambaram was the first person to be arrested under that act. Because state is going always through new instruments to separate the dissent. And suppression of dissent is one of the greatest characteristics of, most significant characteristics of fascism. That's why my submission ultimately is, only one thing remains to be done in our country when we are working in the present state of democracy or less than democracy, that people's agitation, people's movement against the ruling caste and ruling castes, not only classes, ruling classes and ruling caste, with non-violent means, with democratic means, without taking recourse to violence. Because violence in this country will never be successful. It is condemnable for both in moral sense and also in practical sense. That's the only remedy to come out of the present situation. I once again thank you all for your patient hearing, and with my humble tribute to both Mr. Stan Swamy and my mentor, Dr. Asghar, engineer. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We are running a bit behind time, but we have some time for question answers. I'm sure audience will have some questions. So I think
I will take the initiative. Professor Hansen, when we talk of Hindu nationalism, and we also know the theory of fascism, classical fascism, Nazism, different countries in the world, almost all countries in the world, there are certain trends of fascism, including America. Yesterday only Biden made the statement that rich American are creating problem for American nation. I just want to know if we are convinced that Hindu nationalism is subverting a democratic state into less than democracy, while describing that less than democracy and clearly knowing that there are certain characteristics which are uniformly accepted with all differences among the people, those who have defined fascism, what prevents social scientists and the political scientists from considering Indian present situation of any kind of fascism, whatever the name one can be given? This is personally for my personal enlightenment because I am working at present on that theme.
Indeed, indeed. Yeah, sure. Go
ahead. Good evening to all the guests and the speakers present today. Professor Hansen emphasized on the autocracy of the police system. So as a young observer of politics and society, I have a question to ask. How can we fight the violence, injustice, communalism and autocracy of the system while being non-violent ourselves?
I want to ask, you see, actually, it's a bit confusing. Like Mungekar has already raised a question about fascism. Definitely, it is being debated. A lot of people, like for example, we believe that it is quite fascist. But can we describe this mainly as a plutocracy or something? It's always a confusing thing for me. It appears more like plutocracy, whether in US or India. So that's another thing I want to know. Sorry.
Good evening, sir. Thanks for your lecture. I had two interrelated questions. So first question was where exactly does culture of impunity find its origin in the Indian context? Would it be caste system or would it be the colonial rules and laws that sort of enabled it or made it double fold? And also, how will art survive in this culture of impunity? Would it rather mend the injuries that was brought forth by such a culture? So these were my two questions.
Thank you very much. Let me begin with the two questions about fascism. I'm often asked this question because of my earlier work on Hindu nationalism. I'm trying not to talk about Hindu nationalism all the time because I have done it for a long time, but I will today. So to begin with your question about plutocracy, that's going on as well. I mean, we can say that plutocracy, if we mean by that the rule of small elites over very vast forms of wealth and influence, yes, that is and can be compatible with fascism. But I'll come to the question. The question of fascism is always a tricky one because on one hand, we use it as a kind of, we use the two predominant models, which is Italy and Germany in the interwar years. But there were actually many other kinds of authoritarianism and uniformed people beating up opponents, celebration of violence, celebration of masculinity, strength, and a lot of fascism has to do also with those kind. I mean, I think gender politics, gender hypermasculinity is the heart of any kind of fascism, whatever you want to call it. But on the other hand, there is a lot of situations that not necessarily fit the Mussolini model or the Hitler model. And one thing that's striking in India is, of course, that what you have is the main driver of the Hindu nationalist movement is a movement that is dedicated to dominate Hindu society. That's what RSS wants to do. It wants to change and dominate Indian society, not necessarily through the arms of the state. Whereas in the, for instance, the German case, it was very much the capture of state power that enabled the takeover of many institutions, the takeover, the penetration of the army, the takeover and control of education, many other fields. Now, so it's these are different configurations, right? And so for me, I use fascism or the F word or whatever we want to call it lightly, because I think it's more important to understand that what's happening in India is a variety of different things that are coming together, right? So for the RSS, if we take this still at the heart of the movement, the dominance of the state to turn it into an armed vehicle for accumulation of and to reliance of on reliance on large corporations. Sorry, something I'm not supposed to talk about. Anyway, so that is one part of it, right? But it's not central to the Hindu nationalist project. The domination or the penetration of the army, the celebration of perpetual war, destruction, and all that was not from the get-go. It's actually much more. I think the RSS project is much better understood